So this chapter we're going to focus in on conservation biology, which is the study of how organisms exist on this earth, how things have changed, and how we can keep organisms from going extinct. And this chapter is only going to look at 5 sections. So this is chapter 56. We're going to look at 1, 3, and 4. We will not do the entire chapter. So this first section is about human activities and how we threaten the biodiversity of Earth. And the first thing we need to talk about is extinction. So extinctions are normal. It is normal for species to exist and to go extinct after natural phenomenons or just because they're not doing well in their environment, they weren't well suited to it. So this is natural. However, there is a typical rate of extinction. So how many species are going extinct in a certain amount of time? And with humans alive on this planet, the rate of extinction is much higher than it used to be. So we believe that the rate of extinction is about 100 to 1,000 times higher than the background or maybe what the planet had before humans. But of course, we can't actually know that for certain because we wouldn't be able to study a time prior to human existence. Biodiversity is a really, really important concept when it comes to species being extinct. So the more diverse a species or a individual or a community, the less likely you're going to see extinction. So when we decrease diversity, that causes us to increase extinction. And we can look at biodiversity at several different levels. At the smallest level, we can see genetic diversity within a specific population. So you can see there's 5 different voles here. Some of them have some shared genes, whereas in other species they have different genes. And if this individual species were to come across a pathogen, and some individuals were resistant to that pathogen and some weren't, that would preserve the species, meaning that the ones that were susceptible might die, but the ones that were resistant would be able to survive. On a larger scale, we have what's called species diversity, and this is going to look at the number of different species in a specific ecosystem. So here we've got these little plants here. There's some mushrooms. There's the vole. We've got a deer, a frog. This looks like a slug. And then here's a fern, as well as these big trees that frog is on. So just in this picture alone, you can see a wide variety of species. And then, of course, there are going to be microorganisms that you can't see, probably some nematodes, earthworms, things underneath the soil. So having a rich species diversity keeps an entire ecosystem well balanced. So we see this on coral reefs and forests, all sorts of communities. And then community and ecosystem diversity across the entire landscape. So could you imagine our planet if our planet was entirely forest, or entirely ocean, or entirely desert? That would be very specific. We would not have a large diversity. But because we have so many different biomes in our biosphere, we have a huge diversity of organisms across the entire planet. So when this diversity is disrupted, what can happen is that species can start to disappear. So we have classifications for species that are either threatened or endangered. So the most severe classification is endangered. So endangered is a species that has been hunted or harvested, or its habitat has been hunted or harvested. And it is in danger of extinction throughout most of its range. So the range is going to be its habitat wherever it lives. One example of this in Florida is the gopher tortoise. And we actually have these in like the Fern Forest Natural Reserve up by North Campus and throughout the rest of the state of Florida. But these guys burrow on the ground, which makes them easy prey for humans and other animals. And so they are not well. A threatened species is a species that is likely to become endangered in the foreseeable future if nothing changes. So what would likely happen is a threatened species would become endangered, and then if nothing happens, that endangered species could become extinct. Oftentimes when we label a species endangered or threatened, we follow that up with an action plan. For example, the bald eagle was endangered throughout the United States, but we made it the national bird. We put in orders where you're not allowed to hunt bald eagles, and now they are no longer even threatened. So why should we have diversity besides just extinction? So there are many different positives to having a wide diversity of species and genes within species to choose from. So some species will have novel genes that might make them resistant to pathogens. So for example, finding a virus-resistant gene, putting it into commercial rice, or even finding some that are resistant to that pathogen to begin with, makes that for a really good crop. So that makes it something that humans can either culture that genetics into other plants, or culture that crop and have a good yield where we're not going to be too worried about pathogens or pesticides. 25% of prescriptions, think about that. We have a ton of prescription medication, and a good quarter of them have substances that are originally derived from plants. This is where we think of the Amazon rainforest as a medicine box. There are so many different species of plants in that area. It's very species diverse. And many of those have had components in them that we can use for prescription medication that help to further our study of modern medicine. So when we lose species, we lose access to these genes, we lose access to these plants. Some of the times when we burn the Amazon rainforest, we lose access to species we haven't even discovered are going to be beneficial yet. One of the other reasons we need a diverse environment is to provide what we call ecosystem services. And these are ways in which the natural ecosystem helps sustain human life. So some examples of this. The purification of air and water. So we have plants that will filter toxins out of the air, filter toxins out of the water. Decomposition of waste. If you've ever had a compost pile, you can throw stuff in the compost pile forever and it will continue to compost, and it helps to get rid of kitchen wastes and stuff like that. So humans inevitably have large amounts of waste. The most efficient way of getting rid of waste is to decompose it back into its nutrients and putting it back in the soil. Things like pest control, soil preservation, again, can come from decomposition. The moderation of extreme weather. So the Amazon rainforest sucks a ton of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and that helps to slow the planet's warming. Without the Amazon rainforest, the carbon dioxide that we release from fossil fuels doesn't have anywhere to go. They're the lungs of the earth. And when the carbon dioxide builds up, as we can see, we're going to start to see the planet's average temperature getting warmer over every year. And then we see extreme weather events as a result of that, like stronger hurricanes during hurricane season. So the estimated value, this is, remember, 1997, which is a long time ago, of the Earth was $33 trillion per year. And that has absolutely gone up since then. So humans have introduced many threats to the biodiversity on the planet, which of course results in more extinctions. For a long time, the number one threat to biodiversity on this planet was habitat loss through through logging, removing habitats, building roadways, things like that. But we have mostly changed our mind on this collectively as biologists and recognize that the number one threat to biodiversity is now global climate change, or just global change in general. So habitat loss happens when humans remove the natural habitat of a species. So this can happen through the building of structures. So you can see here, this is a natural kind of mountainous area, but in all of these valleys, you can see little cities as well as this roadway. Our highways go through forests. Habitat loss is also a result of things like logging. So clear cutting forests in order to take that timber. Nowadays, we grow timber in farms that we know we're growing it in a specific spot to chop it down. But also the pollution of other habitats, like the runoff from the Mississippi River Basin into the Gulf of Mexico, creates a huge dead zone in the Gulf, which makes it inhabitable. Introduced species, or sometimes you see these called invasive. So introduced is something that specifically is moved by humans from a place where it originally evolved to live to some new place. And this can be done intentionally or by accident. So this is done by accident with barnacles on boats where they collect in a certain region, the boat goes to another place, and then you see a invasion of these barnacles into that new place. Again, by accident, we believe the lionfish. So the lionfish are native to the Pacific Ocean, and they have been released into the Atlantic Ocean. We think this happened with the Atlantis Resort that had a free flow tank between the lionfish exhibit and the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, these lay eggs just in the water, and so they could have escaped through that. But there are plenty of other ways that they could have gotten into the Atlantic as well. But the lionfish don't have any natural predators in the Atlantic Ocean, and so they are taking over. You'll see in Florida and along the eastern seaboard that places will have lionfish competitions. There are scientists who are trying to teach grouper and sharks how to eat lionfish so that they can have some control of their population. This is called kudzu, and if you've ever driven on the highway in the southeast, you have probably seen this. This is a very fast-growing vine which will grow up over other plants and then completely shade them out and kill them. So often an introduced species can become invasive because they don't have a predator that eats them, they don't have any parasites, or maybe they are a parasite that does really well in that area. They don't have any pathogens that kill them, or they're resistant to the pathogens in this area, and oftentimes they spread very, very rapidly to the point where human intervention is almost inefficient. Sometimes this happens intentionally. So there was a case in Australia where scientists wanted to control the species of some insect, and so they brought in cane toads, which are those really large toads, to eat them. However, the cane toads don't eat that insect, so it didn't actually work. And then the cane toads did so well that they just continued to grow and thrive, and now there's an issue with cane toads in the area. Overharvesting speaks for itself. So this is when humans take too much from the environment. So these are tusks up here, or some kind of horn. Down here you can see tuna. So part of the problem with overharvesting is we often take large organisms with low reproductive rates. So for example, tuna, this is shark fins, where they're really large-bodied organisms. They reproduce very slowly, only one at a time, kind of like humans. And so they're very vulnerable to overharvesting because if you take a single one out of the environment, that's a large wealth of the reproductive stock that you're taking out. And so when you take out massive amounts of these large-bodied creatures, we see this kind of thing happen where shark populations have been plummeting. You can see this is shark fins. These are laid out on a roof to dry. What they do with the shark fins is they will pull up the shark, cut off all of the fins, and throw the shark back alive. And because it's too expensive for them to bring the entire shark on the boat, it takes up too much space, they just want the fins. And so there'll be massive finless shark graveyards where they will just sink to the bottom and die of suffocation while the sailors take these fins. And finning is illegal in some places, but not everywhere. And then there's part of the problem with the ocean is that outside of the boundaries of each country, we have international waters where there's really no regulation of some of this massive overharvesting. And so without global rules for harvesting fish, you can see how this could become a massive problem. All right, and then global change includes climate, but as well as other things that reduce the capacity of the earth to support life. So this can caused by things like acid rain, which are typically a result of pollution. And then the one that we're focused on a lot right now is the increased temperature. So human interference in the climate has caused the global greenhouse gases to increase. And what this does is it traps more heat in the ozone layer, and it doesn't let the heat escape. And it's kind of like your car on a very hot day. You get into the car, the heat hasn't even been able to escape from the glass. So by making the greenhouse gases very thick, the heat is not able to escape the earth. And this increases the temperature over long periods of time. We have seen record heat indexes over the last few years, record numbers of forest fires in California, record number of major class hurricanes in the southeast. And a lot of this is just because the temperature of the water is warmer, the temperature of the land is warmer. We really don't have much room for increasing the temperature anymore before we start to see catastrophic events that are going to affect human as well as other life on the planet.